Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a program today. It's not meant to upset you. It's not meant to scare you. It is meant to enlighten you. We're going to talk today about contraceptives, also known to many as the birth control pill. Now, this is, I know, a very delicate topic because I'm told that about 98% of Catholics, married Catholics, are using birth control. And I suppose the same numbers hold for the other Christian denominations. Now, some of you may remember, especially the Catholic people who are as young as I am, remember in 1968 that Pope Paul VI published an encyclical. That's a letter to the bishops of the world telling them that artificial contraception is morally evil. And of course, there was a big hullabaloo about that. Read the encyclical. It is very, very well done. It's beautiful, as a matter of fact. The Pope talks about the importance of respecting the natural law and the natural cycles of fertility in women. He talks about how important it is psychologically. He talks about how important it is morally, and he talks about how important it is even physically for the well-being of the woman, but also for the marriage itself, because marriage is a complementary institution. Husband and wife have to work together to have a successful marriage. Well, as I said, there was quite a hullabaloo. A lot of people, came right out, even Catholics in high places, came out and rejected what the Pope had to say. And, to this day, people reject the encyclical. As a matter of fact, they don't even talk about it much anymore. Now, what about the other Christian churches? Well, as I said many times, there are other Christian churches that have different theologies, moral insight regarding contraception. Now, most of the Christian churches up until the 1920s were on the same page with this. They all believed that contraception was an evil, a moral evil. And the break first came with the Anglican Church at the Lambeth Conference. I think it was in 1927, someplace in the 1920s, when they said, under certain circumstances, under limited circumstances, contraception may be morally allowed. Well, from that little bit, you can imagine what happened. The floodgates opened up, and it's almost something that people just take for granted now, that birth control has to be a part of a marriage situation. Well, we have a guest today, Mike Gaskins, who wrote a book called In the Name of the Pill, In the Name of the Pill, and he is going to point out to us some of at least the physical and biological dangers of taking a birth control pill. So pay close attention to what he's saying. Even if you are, a senior citizen and you're past childbearing age, you still have children and grandchildren. You might want to pass on this information. You might want to get Mike's book, In the Name of the Pill. You might want to even, show them this television program, because what Mike has to say is extremely important. So, Mike, hey, thanks for being here. This is a tough topic. I mean, how did you get into this deal?
I call it In the Name of the Pill, but I'm talking about all hormonal contraceptives, really, because there are different delivery methods now, obviously, with injections and IUDs that have the hormones in them and all of that. And really the way I got into it was I do a lot of live events in my work. I work in video primarily. And I was at an event with a bunch of different specialties, doctors getting CME credits. and the entire event was centered around autoimmune disease. And the opening night keynote was a man who's called the father of autoimmune disease, really a world-renowned, respected doctor. And he was kind of covering the broad strokes of autoimmunity. And he was talking about how estrogen plays a key role, and they've known that from the beginning because of how these drugs interact in women. And then he started talking about how our immune systems have these T cells, which are the soldiers of the immune system. And when our estrogen attaches to these soldiers, it kind of arms them and gives them their marching orders.
So I want to ask you a question before we go on. You're at this conference, folks. This is Continuing Medical Education, CME. That's what that means. And was this like a Catholic event? What was it?
No, it was this was a secular event for medical professionals, just to get because doctors are required to keep their license. They have to get so many credits each year. Right. So this was basically just a broad conference on autoimmunity for doctors from all different specialties to continue getting their medical education, keeping their license up to date. And so he talked about how these the T cells, they're the soldiers of the immune system, and chemicals that mimic natural estrogen get in our body, and they attach to these cells. And now the soldier is armed, but it doesn't know what to attack because it's not our natural estrogen. And it was funny because the more he talked, the more I was convinced he had to be talking about birth control. I couldn't think of another chemical that was designed to mimic natural estrogen. I didn't know about endocrine disruptors back then, but clearly, birth control is the only thing that really is designed to mimic natural estrogen. And so when the conference was over, I went up to Dr. Rose and I asked him, I said, so what role does birth control play in all this? Because I couldn't believe I'd never heard it before. And he actually said none. He said it plays no role. And I was taken aback. And I said, well, that seems counterintuitive based on everything you just said. But I really wasn't questioning him. I believed him because he's the world-renowned authority. But he kind of doubled down and he said, no, there's never been any evidence linking birth control to any of these diseases. And again, I believed him. But when I got back to my hotel room that night, I was still thinking about it. And I picked lupus. It was the first autoimmune disease that came to mind. And I Googled lupus plus oral contraceptives. And I found this article on a new study that showed that women who took birth control were 50% more likely to develop lupus. And I was blown away. And I thought, well, maybe Dr. Rose hasn't heard about this study yet. I'm going to try to find him tomorrow and tell him about it. And I kept reading the article, and I got about halfway down, and there was a quote from him saying, this doesn't mean women should stop taking birth control because of some increased risk of lupus. And so I dealt with a lot of issues, and I say sometimes I feel like my journey is like a lot of women when they go through birth control. They bring issues up to their doctors, and their doctors kind of gaslight them and act like it couldn't be from the birth control, or they just kind of push it aside and never take it seriously.
Why don't doctors take this seriously? I mean, the doctor had all this information, and it took you to put some pieces together. Do doctors tell their patients, women, hey, this is a little bit risky? Does that ever come across?
Well, it's, I try to give doctors the benefit of the doubt. I think they want to trust their training. And, as a doctor, when you've got people coming to you sick, they don't want to hear you say, I have no idea what could be going on. They want you to be pretty confident in your response to them. And so I think doctors out of necessity are confident in their training, but training the way it is now is pretty much financed by the pharmaceutical companies.
Pharmaceutical companies have a big role in research, have a big role in the medical profession, and they want us to just stay quiet and, well, I hate to use the expression, but they just want us to be dumb. They just want us to be dumb about the whole thing, and that way we won't be scared, and they can continue to produce whatever they're producing in their pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny, as I started to dive into it, I became really fascinated by the history of how birth control was pushed through without ever really being proven safe. And so the first half of the book kind of looks at that history and what was behind getting birth control pushed through. The second half of the book looks more at the science and the different diseases that have been affected by the drugs from this, by these hormones. And it's really interesting to see. This is kind of diving off into the deep end of the pool right away. But one of the things I discovered was a lot of the early feminists felt like their movement was being co-opted by the population growth people. They felt like they were, this was being forced on them, that they were trying to get these drugs approved. And it's interesting to see. So in 1970, Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin was doing hearings on, it was called competitive problems in the drug industry. It was a really broad set of hearings, and it ended up being the longest hearings in congressional history. So as he was going through this, Barbara Seaman, who was a feminist who had written a book called The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, contacted him and said, I think you should look at oral contraceptives. They've never really been proven safe. And she sent a copy of his book. And he ended up devoting a section of the hearings to just oral contraceptives and looking at how they had never really been proven safe and why they were approved. And it was interesting because he was also the father of Earth Day, which started that year. So as a conservationist and someone who really cared about the earth and someone who had expressed fears of this population growth on the planet, I think a lot of the doctors who were behind this and the powerful people kind of felt comfortable, to give a wink and a nod when they were talking to him.
It's almost like conspiracy. I mean, it's like a conspiracy. First, you're telling me, they want to keep us ignorant, and then you're telling us that some people behind this are pushing for a decrease in the population control. So we have like a little conspiracy going on here, don't we?
We do, but it was very out in the open. Several doctors testified that to get this drug approved, they changed the benefit to risk paradigm. It's the first time in history that the FDA looked at the benefit to society versus the risk to the individual woman. So they were willing to essentially sacrifice women, a few women, who knows how many, in the name of reducing population growth.
Hey, folks, this is big stuff. I mean, this you hear this term about, like the New World Order. This is getting scary. Go ahead, please. I think.
I agree with you. It's so in 1969, this was just before the Nelson Peel hearings. This kind of set the tone. I think that Dr. Frederick Robbins was the first one to really publicly articulate it, but he was speaking to a group of medical school deans. And he said this, I want to quote it. I want to make sure I don't mess it up, so I'm going to read it. The dangers of overpopulation are so great that we may have to use certain techniques of conception control that may entail considerable risk to the individual woman. And so these were the kinds of statements that were coming out in the congressional hearings that yes, it is dangerous. Yes, it can cause certain things, but we have to look at the benefit to society. This is how important this is.
All right. Okay. So we're in the midst now of a conspiracy, and we're talking about a pill that can do biological damage to women. Could you tell us about what kind of things, you talked about lupus, what else can happen taking this pill? Estrogen chemicals, is that what it is?
The estrogen and then the progestins too. Like some of the newer generation progestins are probably worse than the original combination pills as far as the amount of damage that they cause. And it's everything. It seems impossibly diverse, the effect it has on women's bodies. Everything from increases in glaucoma to breast cancer to all these autoimmune diseases like lupus, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease. So I mentioned that women who take birth control are 50% more likely to develop lupus. They're over 30% more likely to develop multiple sclerosis. They're 3 times more likely to develop Crohn's disease. And then you have 30-something% more likely to develop gallstones. Then you have liver adenomas. And then again, like I said, breast cancer has really shot through the roof since these things went on the market. And so when you look back through the Nelson hearings and you read the transcripts, a lot of the stuff was really prophetic. Lupus was not a household word back then. And one of the doctors who testified is trying to explain to Congress how this really rare disease, is starting to affect young women. And he's seen evidence that it's being caused by these new birth control pills. Well, if you look at lupus now, it's more thought of as a young woman's disease, and so these diseases, we have enough of a history now. We can see the effect that the drug has had on these diseases. Multiple sclerosis has always been kind of discriminatory against women, but we can see a pattern where women are being much more affected over the last 50 years with multiple sclerosis than men.
We're going to go to a break, and we're going to be right back, okay?
We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support.
And we're back. Okay, Mike, we're just telling us about all these horrible diseases that can potentially occur because of the taking of a pill. I want to ask you, how are you going to get word out about this to our women?
Well, I write for a few different websites, and then of course in the book. And my whole thing is our medical industry, for it to be viable and operate the way it's supposed to, it's all based on informed consent. And if women aren't being informed, then it just kind of falls apart. So I went into the book thinking, I really just want to inform women. I want them to know what the dangers are so they can make a decision for themselves, because they're not being given that opportunity right now.
Okay, I want to ask you this. We talked about, the physical harm that can be done. We talked about, the medical community. We talked about the pharmaceutical community. I posited a little bit of a conspiracy seems to be peeking through behind the magic curtain. I want to ask you about other effects. Have you studied other effects? Paul VI, we talked about humanae vitae, it means of human life. As I said, most people don't pay attention to it anymore. Unfortunately, they don't. Can you talk anything about some of the other detrimental effects that the pill is having, say, on marriage, the marital relationship?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I don't have anything about it in the book, but there are definitely studies that show that, families who do natural family planning have a much higher rate of staying together and much lower divorce rate. But then also you mentioned like just the spirit and psychologically, that's kind of started to come out in some of the scientific research over I would say over the past 5 or 6 years. There was a large Danish study that looked at over 1 million women and kind of followed their medical history. And they came out with results saying that women who take hormonal birth control are 70% more likely to develop depression. And this was also brought up in the Nelson Pill hearings in 1970. And the depression they experience is worse. So they're 3 times more likely to actually commit suicide than women who aren't taking hormonal birth control.
I didn't want to do this show to scare you, but this information is something that you have to have. You have to pass this on. I mean, we have physical, now we have psychological problems, and extreme depression, suicidal. Mike, I think I've heard enough, but tell us more.
One of the other things I hear from people a lot is they assume that problems with birth control were with the older generations, the first and second generation of birth control, but that's not true either. Again, I contend that the newer generations are more dangerous in a lot of regards. And one of the things that I've kind of gotten into is as well as the blood clots, the number of pulmonary embolisms, the number of parents I've met whose daughters died at 16, 18, 20 years old from a blood clot getting into her lungs, and then she has a pulmonary embolism. Women who take birth control are twice as likely to suffer a heart attack or stroke as women who don't. And so look at, so Yaz and Yasmin are the most popular brands right now. In 2016, Bayer paid over $2 billion with a B dollars to settle over 10,000 blood clot related lawsuits. So these new 4th generation progestins seem to be much worse, much harder on the liver and gallbladder, and then also at creating blood clots than the older versions.
Mike, I've seen some studies where it would even say that okay, there comes a point where a woman does want to have children, and then because of taking the pill for so many years, she can't conceive. how do you how do you help people to be careful, but also then how do doctors can they overcome the effects of the pill, or is it too late sometimes?
Sometimes it's probably too late. And again, this is a problem Barbara Seaman wrote about in her book in 1970, that some women, their periods just never came back, that after a period of time on the pill, they were infertile. They were never going to have children after that.
It's just amazing. You're not a theologian, but what about? I mean, you sound like somebody who's done a lot of reading on this topic. What do you see as the moral implications of taking the pill? What do you think?
Well, it's funny. That's one of the things. Like you said, I'm not a theologian, and it's one of the things I do try to really stay away from, as far as I don't want to give a sense of any kind of judgment. I just want to give information. And my hope is, and I have actually known couples who weren't Catholic, and then they discovered fertility awareness methods, and it often started by realizing that, the birth control is doing something wrong to me. And then they discovered fertility awareness. And then they realized the Catholic Church is the only church that really stood strong on this. And then they start saying, well, what else did the Catholic Church get right? And I've actually known of people who converted, by basically following this path of recognizing how wrong other churches were on contraceptives.
During marriage preparation, when we have a couple coming in preparing to get married, we do offer we call NFP, natural family planning. And I suppose a lot of them just saying to themselves, what's that? We're not going to do that. But every so often we do get a couple that are interested in it. And it seems like they are a much more together couple. It's not just, that they're not concerned about the pill causing physical damage, but it seems like they're on the same wavelength. And it has to do, and I talk about this moral issue, respect for your spouse's body. In this case, respect for the natural cycles of a woman's body and God's plan for the reproduction of children. And I highly recommend that to young couples. Look, even if you're not a Catholic, and maybe some of the non-Catholic churches have a program, you can come on over. Be glad to put you in touch with people who are teaching NFP and to help you to better understand what marriage is, to better understand God's plan, and to better relate to one another. Marriage means a respect for your partner and respect for how your partner's body works. It's one big picture: physical, mental, and spiritual. Now, Mike, I want to ask you ever talk to Catholic doctors and say, hey, doc, are you advising your people as to the dangers of this artificial contraception?
I have, and the feedback is usually pretty positive. I think, it's funny. I had one Catholic OBGYN tell me she had kind of awoken to the risks and what horrible damage these pills were doing. And she told me, it's hard to find somebody in my specialty who's willing to say anything bad about birth control because it represents about a third of their business. And so I think that's kind of the hurdle from from that end is getting doctors to. Upton Sinclair once said it's hard to get a man to see something that his salary depends on him not seeing. I think we have to wake up to the idea of, okay, it is a business, but you have to look for morally viable solutions. You can't be just giving this to women. And I think what the point you made was great about couples. I write in the book that kind of my birth control journey started years ago when my wife and I were young in our relationship, and she had gone into a doctor for sinuses or allergy problems or something. And anyway, we were a young couple, and that came up, and they ended up giving her birth control. And we weren't Catholic yet. We converted in 2005, and we weren't really in a church. And so birth control sounded like a great option. We hated condoms, really, and it was like, all right, let's try this. And a couple of months in, I was there when she was opening the package, and the little pamphlet fell out, and I started unfolding it and started reading it. and became immediately alarmed at, some of the side effects that were listed on there with, her family history, especially. And I said, what did the doctor say about these side effects? And she said, what side effects? They hadn't discussed it at all. And so we sat down and we had a really earnest conversation. And at the end, I was like, if at the end of our lives, this means I get to spend even one less day with you, it's not worth it to me. It was like, it's your decision, but for my sake, I don't want you taking these things.
Well, that was a beautiful way of putting it. I don't want to spend, my life with one day less than God has given you. That's beautiful. Wow.
If she suddenly develops some sort of cancer and she's gone like that, think of all the years I would lose with her. And I just couldn't bear the thought of that. And but I was amazed by her relief, because she had been kind of taking them because she didn't want to disappoint me. She knew I didn't like condoms either. And she thought, this is our solution. And she didn't want to disappoint me. And so to hear me say, no, it's your decision, but I don't want them, it changed everything. And I think it was a pretty pivotal point in our relationship too, because she knew how much I loved her and how much I cared for her. And I think that's exactly what you're saying with the NFP. When you're on the same page together and you're not putting all the responsibility on her, but that's what this culture teaches us, is it's a woman's right, it's a woman's body, it's her body, her choice. And it's ridiculous. But at the time, I didn't even feel like, am I allowed to talk to her about it? Because really, it's her choice. Do I have a voice here?
Mike, this conversation can go on and on and on. I'm fascinated. I'm depressed. I'm angry, but I'm also happy that a guy like you is finally putting the truth out there. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mike's for action. I'm for action, and I hope you are too.
Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So, YouTube and you make a fine couple. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.